When my Aunt Susan asked me to house sit for a week, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Her house, an old Victorian-style home nestled in a quiet neighborhood, was a place I'd always loved. It was filled with ornate molding, high ceilings, and walls lined with family photos that seemed to stretch back to the 19th century. While I had visited many times before, being there alone gave the house an entirely different feel. It wasn't just the creaky floorboards or the faint lavender scent lingering in every room. It was as if the house itself was alive. On my first day, I wandered through the house, reacquainting myself with the layout. I watered the plants, fed the cat, and double-checked the doors and windows. Everything seemed exactly as I remembered, except for one thing. At the end of the second-floor hallway, there was a door I didn't recall ever seeing before. It was painted the same pale white as the walls, blending in almost seamlessly, but it wasn't on any mental map I had of the house. Curious, I tried the knob. It didn't budge. That evening, I called Aunt Susan to ask about it. "Oh, that room," she said casually. "It's just storage. The door sticks sometimes. Don't worry about it." Her tone was light, but something about the way she said it didn't sit right with me. That night, I settled into the guest bedroom. The house was quiet, except for the occasional groan of the old pipes. I fell asleep quickly, but around midnight, a sound woke me up. At first, it was faint, like a floorboard creaking under someone's weight. I sat up, holding my breath, straining to listen. The sound came again, louder this time, closer. It was coming from the hallway. Heart pounding. I grabbed my phone and turned on the flashlight. I stepped into the hallway, scanning the floor and walls. There was nothing there. I told myself it had to be the house settling. That's what people always say about strange noises in old houses, right? But as I turned back toward my room, my eyes lingered on the locked door at the end of the hall. It felt like it was, daring me to open it. The next day, I couldn't stop thinking about it. As I went about my chores, I kept glancing up at the second floor, my mind always circling back to the door. By mid-afternoon, I decided to try it again. I jiggled the knob and pressed my ear against the wood. Was that shuffling on the other side? I laughed nervously. My imagination was getting the better of me. Later, while tidying the kitchen, I noticed a small bowl labeled "spare keys" on the counter. I hesitated, but curiosity got the better of me. I rummaged through the bowl and found an old brass key that looked like it hadn't been used in years. My heart raced as I climbed the stairs and approached the door. The key fit perfectly. The lock clicked, and the door creaked open. The room beyond was bathed in pale blue light filtering through lace curtains. It was empty, except for a rocking chair facing the window. The chair swayed slightly, though the air was still. A chill ran down my spine. I stepped inside, my shoes barely making a sound on the worn wooden floor. The air was heavy, almost oppressive. As I approached the chair, I noticed something strange. Its shadow on the wall didn't match its movement. The chair's shadow rocked more violently, as if someone invisible were sitting in it. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. In the window's reflection, I saw a figure. Tall, pale, translucent. It stood behind me, its head tilted unnaturally to the side. I spun around, but there was nothing there. The room was empty. I bolted, slamming the door shut and locking it with shaking hands. I threw the key down the stairs, not caring where it landed. That night, I didn't sleep. Every creak and whisper of the wind sent me into a panic. I kept the light on, clutching my phone like a lifeline. The next morning, I called Aunt Susan and told her I had to leave early due to a personal emergency. She sounded concerned, but didn't press me for details. Before I left, I couldn't resist one last glance at the door. It stood there, unassuming, but it felt like it was watching me. A few weeks later, Aunt Susan called to see how I was doing. As we chatted, I hesitantly brought up the locked door. There was a pause on the other end before she let out a nervous laugh. "That can't be right," she said. "That door hasn't locked in years. The key's been missing since I first moved in." I ended the call with trembling hands, unable to make sense of what I had experienced or what I hadn't. One thing was clear: I would never house sit for her again. Camping had always been our summer tradition, a way to escape the chaos of daily life and reconnect with nature. This time it was me, Rachel, Tyler, and Nick heading out to a remote forest area I'd found online. It wasn't on any well-known hiking trails, a secluded clearing near a creek, surrounded by dense trees. It sounded like the perfect spot for a peaceful getaway. The first day was smooth. We pitched our tents, gathered firewood, and spent the afternoon fishing by the creek. By the time dusk rolled in, the fire was crackling, and we were laughing and roasting marshmallows under a canopy of stars. The forest felt serene, maybe a little too serene. The faint rustling of leaves and distant chirping of crickets filled the air. When night fully settled, the fire became our only source of warmth and light. That's when I noticed him. A man stepped into the firelight like he'd always been part of our group. He was tall, with gray streaked hair and surprisingly clean clothes for someone in the wilderness. He smiled, but it wasn't friendly. It was sharp, almost predatory. "Evening," he said, his voice gravelly. "Mind if I join you?" We exchanged uneasy glances. Random encounters weren't uncommon while camping, but something about him felt wrong. Rachel, ever the diplomat, forced a polite smile. "Sure. Are you camping around here?" He nodded slowly, his gaze moving between us. "Not far. Name's Greg." Before we could say much else, Greg sat by the fire as if he'd been invited. The mood shifted immediately. Our easy banter was gone, replaced by a heavy silence. Greg didn't seem to care. He launched into stories about his own camping experiences, but they quickly took a darker turn. He talked about hikers going missing in these woods, campsites left abandoned. His tone was casual, but his words carried a sinister edge. "Not everyone makes it out of places like this," he said, staring into the flames. "Sometimes the forest just takes them." I tried to laugh it off. "Well, we've been camping for years. I think we'll be fine." Greg chuckled a low, unsettling sound. "Doesn't matter how experienced you are. The forest doesn't care." Time dragged as Greg kept talking, his presence a dark cloud over our campsite. Tyler leaned over and whispered to me, "We need to ask him to leave. This guy is seriously creeping me out." Before I could say anything, Greg stood abruptly. His demeanor shifted, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "You all should stay close tonight," he said. "There are things out here you don't want to meet." Without another word, he disappeared into the darkness. We sat in stunned silence, the fire crackling between us. Finally, Rachel broke the tension. "Who does that? Who just walks into someone's campsite and acts like that?" We decided to take shifts keeping watch, just in case Greg came back. Rachel took the first shift while I tried to sleep. But a few hours later, she shook me awake, her voice low and urgent. "Alex, I think he's back." My heart pounded as I grabbed my flashlight. Outside the tent, the night was eerily quiet, except for faint footsteps circling our campsite. I swept the flashlight beam through the trees, but nothing appeared. The footsteps stopped, but the oppressive feeling of being watched lingered. At dawn, we decided to pack up and leave. The trip had soured, and none of us wanted to stay another night. As we hiked back to the car, the unease grew. I kept catching glimpses of movement in my peripheral vision, quick flashes of something darting between the trees, but every time I turned, there was nothing there. When we reached the final stretch of the trail, I froze. Greg was there, partially hidden by a tree ahead of us. His face was calm, unnervingly so. "You're going the wrong way," he said, stepping onto the path. "Let me help you." Panic surged through me as 3 more figures emerged from the trees, their faces pale and emotionless. I didn't think I'd just grabbed Rachel's arm and yelled for the others to run. We bolted through the woods, the sound of our pounding footsteps mixing with my racing heartbeat. When the parking lot came into view, relief washed over me until I saw the car. Scratched into the dirt on the hood were 3 chilling words: "See you next time." We never went camping again. I often worked late at my office. The quiet usually helped me focus, but tonight felt different. The air was heavy, and every little creak in the building seemed amplified. By the time I looked at the clock, it was nearly midnight. I packed up quickly and headed to the elevator, eager to get home. The elevator groaned as it started its descent. Halfway down, it jolted to a stop between the 12th and 11th floors. I sighed, assuming it was just another technical issue. I pressed the emergency button, but nothing happened. My phone had no signal either. That's when the lights flickered, plunging the elevator into darkness. When they came back on, I noticed something that made my stomach drop: a faint handprint smudged on the mirrored wall behind me. I turned to look, but no one was there. Then the lights flickered again, and I heard it a whisper, soft but clear, echoing in the confined space, "Get out." I froze, clutching my phone tightly. The air grew so cold I could see my breath. Suddenly, the elevator jolted again, dropping slightly. My phone buzzed in my hand, and when I glanced down, a message from an unknown number lit up the screen: "Don't look up." My heart pounded in my chest, but I couldn't stop myself. I tilted my head upward, and that's when I saw it. The ceiling panel had been pushed aside, and a pale, grinning face stared down at me. I screamed, stumbling back into the wall, and just like that, the figure was gone. The lights flickered erratically, throwing the small space into chaos. Without warning, the elevator started moving again, but instead of going down, it shot upward, zooming past the top floor of the building. When it finally jerked to a stop, the panel above the doors read 99, a floor that didn't exist. The doors creaked open to reveal a dim, endless hallway. The walls were peeling, and the air smelled damp and stale. A faint, mechanical hum filled the space. My gut told me to stay inside, but something pulled me forward. "Hello," I called out hesitantly, stepping into the eerie corridor. The elevator doors slammed shut behind me, making me jump. My phone buzzed again. This time the message was even worse: "Welcome home." I froze as a shadow appeared at the end of the hallway. It was far away at first, but grew larger, gliding closer and closer. I tried to move, to run, but my legs felt like lead. Just as the shadow loomed inches from me, the elevator doors suddenly slid open behind me, and I lunged back inside, slamming my hand on the close button. The doors shut just as the shadow reached me, and the elevator jolted downward. When it finally reached the ground floor, the doors opened to the familiar lobby. I didn't waste a second. I sprinted to my car, my breath ragged and my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keys. The drive home was a blur, but I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see something or someone following me. Even as I locked myself inside my apartment, the cold, heavy feeling lingered. I couldn't shake what had happened, and I still don't understand what I saw. But one thing's for sure: I'll never stay late at that office again.